Hello, I'm Rick Schumacher with the LBM Journal, and I want to thank you for joining today's webinar, Effective Succession Planning Strategies. I'll turn over the reins in a few minutes to our presenters, Sam Brownell and John Wagner. It's natural for business owners to become anxious as they consider how their business will move forward without them. Common questions include, who should I transition ownership to? How do I protect my family? How do my decisions impact the value of my business? In today's webinar, Sam Brownell, Managing Director at Stratus Wealth Advisors, and John Wagner, Managing Director at West M&A, will discuss many of these common concerns, how leadership continuity can impact the value you get for your business, and strategies for confronting some of the most challenging conversations. Live Q&A will follow. Sam Brownell has been a financial professional since 2006 and formed Stratus Capital Management, which has since grown into Stratus Wealth Advisors, in 2013 to provide goals-based investment management to individuals and small businesses. As the firm grew, an increasing number of small business clients sought Sam's advice on their own business growth issues, including valuation, tax strategy, and M&A. In 2019, Sam earned the CVA certification from the National Association of Certified Valuators and Analysts to better serve his business clients. He also earned his MBA from the University of Maryland's Robert H. Smith School of Business and is a chartered financial analyst. I got that right. Is that right? CFA?
Yeah, correct. Nailed it, Rick.
Yay. And John Wagner is the M&A columnist for LBM Journal and the author of 23 books, including his latest, M&A Basics for People in a Big Hurry. John's a regular speaker on M&A topics at the annual LBM Strategies Conference and is here today because of his expertise as Managing Director for First West Mergers and Acquisitions, full-service international investment banking and advisory firm that has a very successful specialty sector in the LBM business. Couple of details before we get started. All attendees are muted, so you can hear us, but we can't hear you. If you're having technical questions or issues, please click the chat button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll work to address any technical questions in real time. If you have questions for Sam or John, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and they'll address as many questions as possible after the presentation. We expect to be finished in about 30 to 40 minutes. We are recording this webinar, and we'll send a link to the recording to everyone who registered. It'll also be posted on lbmjournal.com. And today's webinar is sponsored by Stratus Wealth Advisors, and they work with business owners to take care of resolve all kinds of financial issues and questions, investment management, business continuity, succession planning, business valuation. They pretty much do it all for people in our industry. And Sam, as a sponsor of the LBM Strategies Conference, Sam Brownell and Stratus are invested in your success. So you can learn more at stratuswealthadvisors.com. And with that, I turn it over to Sam and John.
Excellent. Thanks, Rick. Thanks for that nice introduction. And before we get started, I just wanted to plug that I am also sporting my Yeti here from last year's LBM Strategies Conference.
All right.
So what John and I want to talk about today is some effective succession planning strategies, but really what we want to look at are some of the, what I would call more non-quantifiable pieces of a succession plan and sale that are really going to be important to you as a business owner and to your business. Because it's easy to sit here and talk numbers and value and EBITDA and all of that. And I know John has given some great webinars on that. But ultimately, what makes or breaks a lot of these transitions is people. Because at the end of the day, it's our people that make our business. So we're going to dive into some case studies, and then John's going to talk a little bit more specifically about what this means from an M&A standpoint. So, as Rick said, I won't go too deep into this, but we are a firm that specializes in the LBM industry, as John does as well, and we do business valuations, everything from gift and estate tax to buy-sell agreements to preparing for an M&A. And we think about ways to maximize that value. And then we look at the succession planning and make sure that ties in with your personal financial planning. And we can provide all kinds of services from tax to estate coordination and then think about asset management. So really feel free, anybody, to reach out to us at any time. We're always happy to have a conversation. I figured that this little cartoon here might be a good way to get us started, because unlike a lot of the folks who are looking to transition their business right now, it's not a foregone conclusion today that your kids are in line and want to take over the family business. And so that's where it really becomes helpful to start thinking about all of your options. And even if you are in a position that's fortunate enough where one or more of your children work in the business and you're going to be handing over the reins, there are still lots of sticky issues around leadership and who should get a majority stake and will your key employees respect your children. So, all of these things are really important and can be dealt with, but they need to be communicated. And so that's part of where we're going to start today. Just to make that point a little bit clear with some numbers, there's a number of different studies that are done out there, and these numbers were pulled from a PricewaterhouseCoopers study. A huge percent, a majority, right, of business owners want to or expect to transition their business to the next generation. But in reality, we know that happens very rarely, right? At 15% in this study, I've seen anything from in the single digits up to about 20%. But essentially, this is not the succession strategy that most of you will be using. And we need to be very clear about that up front, because it does impact what you do with your business and where you transition it and what are your options. So from my perspective, I want to walk through two case studies from recent examples that will hopefully paint some pictures of folks that you recognize or you see in your peers, that will give you an idea of, oh, okay, yeah, those are some of the issues that we're dealing with. So the first one, and this is going to deal more specifically with children who do not want the business, is where does the business go, right? If your kids don't want the business. And so let's just take a look at a hypothetical profile here of an owner. And we know that most owners are very involved in the business. They have a lot of the relationships. They may be doing a lot of the buying. And so they are intimately involved, not just in running the business, but in the operations of the business. And that's fine until we start talking about transitioning ownership of the business. Because if you are the business, it's very difficult to convince somebody else they should pay you a lot of money for your business and you're going to walk out the door. So concerns, everybody has them. All owners have them. And right now there's a laundry list of concerns to add to the, what do I do with my business? And one of the things that we see a lot is, I've got an asset, it's probably my most valuable asset. How do I protect it? And how do I build wealth for my family while making sure that I'm protecting my employees and I'm leaving a legacy in the community, and I'm not letting my management team walk out the door because they were only invested in me and not the business. And so these are a lot of concerns. And what often happens is these concerns get buried, and they get buried under the day-to-day operational concerns. And at a certain point, we have to zoom out and we have to start focusing on the business as opposed to just being in the business and being part of the business. And what happens is, with a lack of communication and a lack of good planning, burying some of those concerns can lead to poor decisions. And a lot of these that are ultimately going to affect the ability to transition ownership of your business come down to things like, well, nobody can do this like I can, so I don't know if I should really even bother teaching it to somebody. Or we've always done business this way. I hear e-commerce is getting better and better, but I don't know if it's worth the investment for me. And so being able to talk to somebody, somebody in our position, somebody like John, to really get an idea of what buyers are looking for and what's out there in the market, I think can be really, really useful, because just getting some of those thoughts out of your head can be really useful. It can be useful for you, because now it's not just spinning around up there, and it helps your advisors, it helps your management team be able to understand where you are and start that communication, because that's really the key here, is making sure that the communication stays strong. And ultimately, these poor decisions lead to lower value, because there aren't very many buyers out there who are going to say, well, you've done a great job running the business for the last 40 years, but just walk out the door. That's fine. No big deal. It's perfectly fine. Your knowledge can go with you. And so that's where you get the opportunity to really teach, to be a mentor, and to go into a new role in the business and to watch it thrive. It's essentially a role of coaching, and that's fun to watch. And I think it's something that you will see buyers are very pleased with down the line, because this is going to lead to things like increased margins. It'll lead to a bigger pool of buyers. And so that's really what we're going for. If the business isn't going to transition internally, then we have to make it not just more valuable, but also more marketable. So who's going to want this business, and what are the reasons why they're going to want the business? And that's where somebody like John, a good investment banker, is going to be able to really tell you what you need to do to make it marketable, and then make sure that it's sold the right way. So John, any comments here before we move on?
No, I'm right in sync with all you're saying, Sam. And I do want to point out that our service at First West and Sam's service in terms of wealth protection are not in any opposition. We look at them really as a continuum of flow. We're really brokers. We come in, condition a company for sale, and take it to market. And Sam is there essentially preserving wealth, tax strategies, and really looking at the succession for the owner after the sale. So, but carry on, Sam, right with you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, John. So another case study, and this would be the case for some of you, and if you're lucky enough to have kids that are working in the business, that's great. And they may want to take over the business. That's great. You have that, who am I going to pass it to? But that doesn't necessarily mean that your concerns go away. Just because there's somebody to take over the reins of the business doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be easy, or it will be trouble-free, or it will be emotionally easy for you to give up the reins. And so I think that's another thing that's really important as we start talking through some of these more soft areas that can really impact what's going on in the business. And so to give you just an example here, based on this profile, is what we see a lot, and it was the case with this owner, is they knew that they had somebody to take over the business, but they were worried about starting some awkward conversations. And you'll see it on the next slide in terms of what those conversations were. But a lot of times it's the interpersonal. Are my kids in a position to be leaders? If there's more than one of them that wants the business, who's going to take over? Who's going to be the president? Who's going to be the CEO? Who's going to be calling those shots? And is it fair to the other child? And so these are difficult decisions. They really are. And that's where it's important to have somebody who can facilitate a conversation on the outside, who's not as emotionally involved, because that's where somebody from our position can come in and really start to talk to you about, what do you want to do? And then let's sit down with the stakeholders and make sure we map out a way to do it so that everybody feels heard. And again, as we talked about before, starting the discussion can be really hard. And it doesn't really matter. This could be if you're buying or you're selling outside the business, right? You're selling to a third party. But just starting that discussion can be a huge lift. This is your baby, right? You've been caring for this business for the last 30 plus years. It's really difficult to think about it as not being under your control anymore. And that is a really heavy lift. And so that's a great first step. And sometimes that first step is, we spend some time talking about that, and then you as the owner need to go back and really do some thinking and come back in 6 months or so when you've got your thoughts in a better place. And so starting the conversation early is important, because if you don't, it's easy to put off and I've got to deal with the volatility in my buying, and I can't hire the right people and they won't stay, and how am I going to get a talent in my sales team, and all of these things that are really big concerns. They can supersede a discussion about what happens to your business. And so thinking from that perspective, get that conversation started, because it will open up a lot of other concerns. And in this instance, one of the big ones was there are two children that are working in the business. Which one should take over? Which one should have a majority ownership stake? And one of the mistakes we see often is oh, well, they're both my children, so we'll go 50-50. That sounds great until the first time there's some type of disagreement over something. And then you're not getting anywhere, because each person has the same vote and everything gets deadlocked at 1-to-1. And so if we can sit down and we can start talking about who may be the better leader, oftentimes the kids, the parents may know, but the kids kind of intuitively sometimes will know, oh, well, you should give it to Johnny, or you should give it to Catherine, because she's going to be the better leader. I don't mind having 49% of the business. And that really can help smooth over some of these issues. So talk them through, think about them with an objective third party. That's the biggest takeaway that I would give from this slide. And then again, we don't want to get in a position where we're making poor decisions because we weren't communicating and we weren't planning in advance. And one of the other ones we see often, especially with intra-family succession, is if there is a child or children outside of the business, well, we'll just give them a minority share in the business, because that's fair, right? We want to make sure that all of our children have the same or as close to equal stakes in our estate as possible. Now, that sounds good until the children get to the point where maybe they're thinking of selling the business, and we go to somebody like John and we say, okay, John, we've got this business. It's a good business. It's got good EBITDA margins. We'd like to sell it. Well, what happens if that minority owner says, well, I don't want to sell it? And those decisions have to be made by unanimous consent. Now we're in a big problem. We've got a minority stakeholder that we may have to force out. We may have to buy out prior to any type of sale. And that can get ugly in and of itself, both in terms of family politics, but also now we have to come up with cash flow to buy that out. How do we explain that down the road to potential buyers? So these are issues that can be avoided by doing some planning and thinking about how do we equalize the stakes of the estate without giving business ownership to somebody who really doesn't deserve it. And I'll give you an example from a business we worked with last year. It was a father and his brother owned the business. The father had bought out most of the brother's stake, but he still had a 15% or so interest in the business that he really didn't want to get rid of. And he said, well, I don't see why I shouldn't just pass this on down to my children so they can continue to get profit sharing from the business. Now, I think right away, a lot of us can see the issues that are going to crop up there from, well, why are we paying these people if they're not involved in the business? Why should that be part of their annuity strategy? And so these are things that you can avoid, but it takes some planning. So we really do encourage you to start early. And it doesn't mean that you have to come up with an entire, from beginning to end, how do I get out of this? What am I going to do post ownership? But these issues come up, and the sooner we know about them, the sooner we can make some course corrections. And again, this can lead to issues, whether it's with the sale now or eventually down the line for the family's overall net worth. We just want to make sure that we're in a position where we are communicating well, because that communication affects our operations, which then are going to impact our margins, which ultimately impact the value that we're going to get for the business. And at the end of the day, this is a huge decision. Most people are only going to do this once. You're probably only going to sell your business once. So we want to make sure it's done right, and we want to make sure it's done within the thought process of the important stakeholders. You as the owner, your family, whoever's coming in, because they're going to play a large role in this, and then customers and employees, right? We don't want to leave them in the lurch just because we weren't making decisions ahead of time. So given that setup there, I want to pass it on to John now so he can talk a little bit more about how that leadership continuity, how your ability to take management that you have now and have it continue under a new buyer really does impact the marketability and the value for the business. So go ahead, John.
Thanks, Sam. Great. I'll just want to echo a couple things Sam said. That getting a third party to come in and value the company, and both Sam's firm and our firm do valuations. To get a third party to come in and stamp it, show some empiricals, go through the financial statements and come up with a likely sale value. For the third party to do that is great, rather than have two brothers arguing over what it's worth and trying to extract some cash based on a value that's not realistic. A lot of companies that are being sold, the owners have sometimes inflated views of what it's worth on the market. So to get a third party in there is really solid. Stops a lot of arguments. So the second thing is, last year, 2021, our firm, we did 4 LBM deals, sold 4 LBM companies. This year, we've already closed 2 deals. We have another one closing in May, and we have 3 other companies for sale. It's a lot of companies and a good kind of sample set to look at. Not one of those did the kids want to take over the business, not even one. So these people who are owners are in, just as Sam's case studies were pointing out, they're in their late 60s, early 70s. They're more or less the children of World War II veterans who came back, started businesses, grew them up over time. They're very valuable businesses, but the kids perceive the LBM industry to be unglamorous. I mean, to put it candidly, they want to work for Google and Facebook and get into CRISPR and trade stocks and crypto and whatnot. They're actually not interested in getting up at 4 a.m. to load trucks and work outside. It's just simply not in the culture. So that's just a changing value in terms of how work is valued. But in all those deals, the owners were selling completely out and they were cashing out of the business. The second thing, echoing what Sam said, is when we go into a deal, we look at a capitalization table to see who owns the company and make sure that we have consent from all the owners. You don't want to go through the exercise of selling a business, come close to the finish line, and have a minority owner realize there's a covenant that they've got where they can block a sale. And then maybe there's a lawsuit. You really have to know who owns the company and do you have their consent to sell the business. The third thing is when we put together a deal book, leadership continuity is absolutely key. You cannot sell a company and walk away right after the closing. So this is where you should engage Sam and ourselves. And again, we have slightly different genres of where we apply our expertise, but do not expect to sell the business and walk away the next day if you want to get top value. We have sold businesses in the past where an owner agreed to stay a year, and then we got the buyer, we got the price, and then he called and said, I only want to stay 6 months, and the price got reduced, and then he was just cooked. He didn't want to work anymore. And he eventually called and said, I actually want to leave at the closing. And so that devalued the business by 7 figures plus in that case, because a lot of the vested knowledge, the relationships, because it's a relationship-based business, was walking away at the close. So I have some light slides here to make a point here. Sam's got control. So let's go to the next slide. So here's what a command center should look like when your business is run by pros, okay? And so, Sam, we're going to go to the next slide there, and we're going to look at this is what, it's all hands on deck. Everybody's focused, it's bustling, and the command center, every different, KPI monitoring station is watching how the business is going. Let's go to the next slide. And again, this is what a buyer wants to see: focused leadership that's going to stay in place after the acquisition, because and I'll talk about the time frame that you should commit to when you're selling a business. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this next photo is what acquirers don't want the command center to look like when they buy a business. And Sam, we go to the next one, and here we have an empty bridge. Okay, so there's nobody in charge. All the historical knowledge, relationships, buyers, the idiosyncrasies of running these businesses, that's been vacated because the executive officers and the officer corps has left the bridge, and there's nobody steering the ship. So now, when you go to sell your business, the leadership team should commit, is expected to commit, to stay for at least a year, and that's going to go by really quick. So now, given it takes about 6 months to get a deal done, when you come to an investment banker like ourselves to put together a deal book, and we take it to market, it's going to take 6 months, and then you're going to have to stay a year. So you're really, from the starting of the process to when you actually retire, you're a year and a half plus committed to it. So if you're eager to get out and start fishing or golfing or writing books or whatever you want to do in your retirement, you have to realize that it could be 1.5 to 2 years, really, from when you make that decision to the time you get it on the market, get it sold, get your money, and get out. Now, that during that year, you're going to be an employee. And so, as Sam was pointing out, you are going to have a changed emotional attachment to the business. You're going to be employed. You're going to have a boss in the form of an operating partner that the buyer is going to install. You'll have maybe new software to deal with. You'll have new financial reporting obligations you didn't have before, and just be prepared for that. So Sam, go to the next thing, next slide there. And this is, we showed that empty ships bridge to show what a business is like when there's nobody at the helm. And this next photo is even worse, what a buyer doesn't want to see. And again, I'm having some levity here with the slides, but go ahead, Sam. You don't want to promise to put somebody in a leadership role who is not experienced. You don't want to say to the buyer, oh, this business runs itself, don't worry about it. We've got a team, we're going to slide in there. These guys know how to run it. And all of a sudden they realize that they've got inexperienced people at the command of a large enterprise. And let's go to the next slide too. And your replacements that you're going to put in place for the workforce post-close, Sam, go to the next slide, should not look like this. You can't put the kids in charge if they don't know how to run a business. Now, I had some fun with those slides there, of course, but go to the next slide, Sam. And the acquirer wants the leadership team in place at close and post-close, next slide, Sam, that produce the EBITDA on which they valued the business. Okay, so if you're got an EBITDA of $1 million and you're being purchased on the basis of that EBITDA, you can't vacate the leadership that achieved that EBITDA. Let's go to the next slide, Sam. And they want the EBITDA production team in place. If you vacate the leadership, as people run to the exits with their cash out checks, go to the next slide, that will devalue the company for acquisition. There's no question. Next slide. The acquirer will examine the operative time frame of EBITDA for the team that will remain in place after the closing. Okay, so if you are going to install a new team under new leadership, ideally you want to have them in place even a year or more ahead of time, so that you can say to the buyer, the owner, I'm going to leave right after the closing. I've got a great team in place. I'm not going to slide them into place just as the acquisition closes. Actually, Mr. Buyer, I've had them in place for over a year, and they are the ones who produce the EBITDA on which you're valuing the business. Okay, so they want that team in place that produce that EBITDA. They don't want volatility after the close. Okay, that's really the sum of the slides. This is really Sam's presentation, and he's the anchor here in terms of the succession planning, the tax planning, the wealth protection. And I'm pointing out that if you have volatility in leadership crossing over that threshold when you close the business and or become an employee, you're going to see it devalued and meaningfully devalued, maybe one full turn. So instead of selling the business at 5x your EBITDA, you'll sell it at 4x or 4.5x. It really does have a 7-figure plus implication for most of the businesses that we have sold. And again, when buyers come in, they reward this succession planning. They reward it with a higher multiple of EBITDA. So that's the slides. And Rick, do you want to open up for questions and see if anything's come in?
Sure. Yeah, and first of all, a couple things. We do our Real Issues, Real Answers survey every month, and one of the questions we're seeing more and more is questions about succession planning. And family ownership and what to do next. And there's so many questions, and this was really, really helpful, Sam and John. So thank you both. We do have a comment from one person. We have a comment. He has a comment and a question. Sam, I'm so glad I attended this webinar. I learned a lot, especially when it comes to navigating the family issues. So thank you. My question is, I'm a few years away from retiring. When should I begin the planning process, and what are the first couple of steps?
Yeah, great, great question. And what I would say, and just to go off of what John was just talking about in terms of leadership continuity, is it's 2 to 3 years would be our suggestion, because in that time frame, it will A, go very fast, but B, we'll be able to put in place a plan that can actually be implemented on. So what we're talking about here is, okay, let's take that owner from being involved in all of these different operations of the business, and let's start figuring out who on that management team, who can handle the insurance review, who can start taking over buying, who can start working with the people and managing the people in the yard, and who can start taking over some of those larger client relationships that have been yours for a really long time. And that takes time. And we don't want to, as John had mentioned, you don't want to just go to a big customer and say, okay, well, I'm leaving in 6 months. So here's Frank, and he'll be taking over for me. You've built these relationships. And if you think about them in your personal life, they're important and they take time to transfer. And so knowing that it's going to be hard, both for you, for whoever you're transitioning that relationship to, and for your customer, they have to get used to somebody new. They may be great, but they're not you. And so allowing yourself time is really important. And so that 2 to 3 year time frame allows for that 12 to 24 months to put a plan in place before you even get to talking to John, and then 6 months and then a year after that close. So, we're definitely talking years here.
Right. I would echo that, is that the planning where Sam comes in, way before you call the investment banker. Honestly, we can have a company on the market in 30 days if the financials are in order for us to put together a book. The fastest we've ever closed a deal is just around 100 days after taking it to the market. So it takes, about a month to get it ready. And then we had an LOI in place, and then it was 100. So right away, we're into multiple months. We've had a couple of deals where it's taken over a year to get the deal done because there's obstacles in the way, EPA reviews, real estate appraisals. It's a very complicated process. And again, be prepared to go. If you want to pull the trigger and call First West, you're looking at a year and a half before you're out the door minimum, if you want to preserve that value with the leadership continuity. But again, Sam comes in a lot earlier. He does those kinds of wealth preservation, tax planning. That stuff takes time to set that up. So again, we're just saying, it's the business cliche, plan ahead.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I guess I would add too that when you're looking at a family business that may stay within the family, sometimes it can take even longer because there are lots of issues between, if siblings own the business, and does it go to each of their kids in equal shares? Does it go to the kid that's involved in the business? All of these things take time to talk about, and there are issues that have to be brought out on the table, and they may not be things that can get settled in a couple conversations. We're talking multiple conversations, a lot of emotional baggage that can be carried into them. And so it is really important to start early. And I would say, that 2 to 3 year time horizon is what we suggest. Probably for some people, it may be even more like 3 to 5, depending on where the business is, because that's the other piece of it, is that regardless of who you're transitioning the business to, if you want to get paid market value for that business, somebody has to know that what they're buying is valuable and is going to be able to produce cash flow into the future.
All right, we have another question here. What is the optimal age to start these conversations with our children who work in the business with us? I'm unsure if my kids even have interest in running this business when I retire, or if they have completely different aspirations. We move on with our day-to-day activities, but I don't think any of us are clear about what the plans should be. Do you have advice on how to start these challenging and emotional conversations?
Yeah, and that's a really great comment and question, because it happens all the time. And just a kind of a short aside story, when we sit down to start a succession plan, we ask, is there anybody in the family who would be interested in taking over the business? Most of the time, the answer is either no, absolutely not, or, well, I talked to my kids once and they said no. But when we press them and we say, well, what kind of conversation did you actually have? It was more of an in passing conversation. And so it becomes really important to sit down as the owner and open it up. You know, it doesn't have to be a conversation where the owner dictates and says, okay, I am going to give the business 70% to you and 30% to you. It's much better to have that conversation where you as the owner sit down with your kids and you start asking questions. Would you be interested? Have you thought about this? What would this mean for your family? How are you intending to pay for this? You know, just get the conversation started with some open-ended questions.
And I would add to that, I'm one of 8 kids in a big raucous Catholic family. And I can't imagine having a conversation with my 7 brothers and sisters and their nieces and nephews, because altogether there's 26 of us now, to go in there and say, hey, we're going to divide up this family business. What do you guys think? I would recommend you have a third party come in as a kind of arbitrator or mediator, a cooling dish for the conversation, and say, look, we're going to gather, book a conference room at a nice hotel and put on lunch, and then have an outside person come in and explain the implications of owning a business and implications of value in terms of leadership. And I think that would just be advisable, because families have history, brothers and sisters have history, and to have, again, that cooling dish element to the conversation, that would be my advice.
Okay, another question. Do you find owners not wanting to work for an acquirer and thus just continue to run the business to an endpoint or to a point of shutting down? This would obviously keep an owner involved longer, but allow independence.
The value is to be extracted upon sale. If you quote unquote run a business until its endpoint, and you basically are just selling, a discounted book value on the business, you're not extracting the wealth out of the business. I would advise, and again, it's very personal decision, that you seek an acquisition before that, because at the end, if you just say, I'm going to run it until I'm 72 years old and then close it down, you're going to sell off the inventory at a discounted book value. You're not extracting the wealth that you built up. I would suggest, rather than coming to a cliff and jumping off, you do a little planning and say, let me see if I can extract some of the value I've built up. You're not just running the business for your salary, you're actually extracting the value you've built.
Yeah, I would definitely agree, John. And I think, and it was on one of the earlier slides, it can be a tempting option to say, well, I want to stay independent and then I'm just going to sell off my inventory. But really what you're doing is you're not even really getting your net book value, which is the equity out of the business. You're getting a discount on that net book value, and then you've put people out of work and there's no legacy left. And so all of these things become important. And that's where, if you are getting to the end of your rope in terms of you're exhausted, or, the last 2 years have been really challenging, or you've wanted to do something else, reach out to one of us and start that conversation, because we want to be able to arrest that momentum before it comes to the liquidation talk, because that is not what is good for anybody. And we don't have to go there if we can arrest that momentum beforehand.
I would add one other thing, is that if you are kind of managing the business to an endpoint, and maybe this conversation has changed your perspective a little bit, businesses are sold at a multiple of EBITDA. If you're a break-even company with no EBITDA, there's really no value to extract. If you have essentially no EBITDA, no free flowing cash beyond your expenses, essentially, your business does not have a value beyond that discounted net book value. So you really want to manage the business for EBITDA. And maybe that's where you bring in a consultant, and consultant comes in, Sam comes in, we come in, we say, look, here's what your EBITDA would be if you controlled some of your expenses in this way. Maybe you've got too many family hanging on there. You got your son-in-law in his truck, and he's kind of, you hired him as a favor to your sister or whatever. There's a lot of ways to have an outsider come in and take a really cold, hard look at your performance, your EBITDA margins, but the business is not valuable on an acquisitions basis unless you have a positive EBITDA. And ideally that EBITDA should be north of $1 million.
Yeah, no, agreed. And then just to add to that, I would say one more thing is, it's fine to run a lifestyle business, but if you want to transition ownership and get the value for that business, you can't just run a lifestyle business anymore. It's got to be a truly professional business that has cash flow, because as John said, valuing on EBITDA, if I'm buying John's business, I'm buying it based on the fact that it's going to make me positive cash flow into the future.
That's right. Businesses are purchased for cash flow. It's a cold, hard calculus, but that's what buyers are after. They have no sentiment toward your family or toward keeping people on that aren't producing. And that is also a change of perspective when you become an employee of a new owner, or have an operating partner who's an overlord of your business.
All right, we have another question here. Now this one, the person says, I'm not an owner, but I know our owner is planning to retire in the next few years. I'm concerned about the lack of planning because I love my job, really want the company to continue. So what's the worst case scenario if the owner waits until the last minute to start putting a succession plan in place?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we touched on it before. The worst case scenario would be that something happens, right? A heart attack, a health crisis or something that now leaves the business really struggling for leadership and grasping at what they're going to do next, right? There's no vision. And so that's where I think, from this person's perspective, I would call it managing up, right? And beginning to start some of those conversations, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Owner, was just curious where you think you're going to be 5 years from now. And just starting some of those conversations to get them thinking about what it might mean. Hey, I love my job, but what happens when you don't own the business anymore? Can I still do the job that I love? Just beginning to manage up a little bit, and not necessarily be blunt yet. That time may come, but to just let the owner know that you really love working in the business and you'd love for it to continue to be a part of the community, I think is a good way to at least begin letting them know that there is something that's going to happen post their ownership.
Got it.
Complete agreement.
Okay, and we have one more question here, and this is going to be a tough, probably the toughest question you guys will answer all year, maybe. I need to find key managers to help take over some of my responsibilities. Where do you suggest is the best place to find them? These days, there are a lot of job recruiting options. So where to find good managers?
I'll chime in just from experience again from these deals we've been working with, now numbering upwards of 7 or 8. The best managers actually are advanced from within the staff, and it's hard to get outside to find someone with passion and knowledge. And again, it's relationship-based business. It's to look down rank and see who's promising, and you find somebody who is maybe a buyer, or they're in charge of fleet management, or they're the dispatcher or whatever, and they have ambitions to grow. And that's really where we see the advancement coming. It's not going to a recruiter and paying a fee and bringing an outside person. We actually have never really seen that work out really, really well. It's finding somebody down rank and saying, hey, Chris or Mark or somebody, have you ever imagined yourself managing this business? And that's a multi-year process. But you may discover some ambition there that you're not aware of.
Yeah, and I would 100% agree. John took the words right out of my mouth. I think that everybody's looking for that silver bullet, oh, I want to hire somebody who's got 20 years of sale experience in the LBM industry and already comes in with a book of some business. And that's not going to happen. And because each of your businesses is so unique, right? This is an industry where, depending on where you are, you could have a much different business if you're out where John is in New Mexico than where I am in Maryland. And so being able to, as we mentioned earlier in the program, mentor, take that knowledge and pass it down the line, that's really powerful. And that's where your best managers are going to come from. But just remember that, as John said, it does take time.
Great, and that's all we have time for. Just so if you liked what you heard today on the webinar and you'd like to learn more and maybe even meet and talk with Sam and John in person, they'll both be at the LBM Strategies Conference this October in Denver. So I encourage you to check that out and register. It's lbmstrategies.com, and there's still a couple days to save $300 on registration. So and you may even score a sweet LBM Strategies Yeti like Sam was showing off.
Yeah, that's right.
or something similar, but we wouldn't do the exact same thing again. But anyway, so thanks guys, thanks John, thanks Sam. This was great. You guys helped a lot of people, and we'll see everybody next time.
Great, our pleasure. Thanks, Rick.
Okay. Thanks, Rick. Thanks everybody. Thanks, Sam. See you.
Yep, you too, John. Take care, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.